This is where we see the difference between the Hisense and something like the Samsung S95F. To the left, again, the S95F. To the right, we have the Hisense U75QG, and we are looking exclusively at HDR so that you can understand how they compare. Now, in SDR, across the board, it will pretty much go toe-to-toe with any TV. HDR is your problem. So as I'm looking at movies, particularly, I have a movie up on the screen right now. This is the Power Rangers movie. It's just too dark, and there is literally no way to fix it. So I don't know if that's a bug or something that you just have to deal with, but that's what it is right now. So if you go into the intelligence settings on the Hisense, we're just going to verify that, again, the auto energy saving and the automatic light sensor are completely disabled, which they are. Okay, fantastic. Now we're going to cycle through the picture presets modes on the Hisense as well, just so you can get an idea. This is the HDR theater mode. Okay. Very green. This is the HDR game mode. Again, extremely dark. This is the energy saving mode. Hilariously, it's the brighter HDR mode. We have the sports mode. It's about as bright as energy savings. This is HDR standard. Again, brighter but dark. Then we have HDR vivid. It's bright, but it's super black crushed. We have the IMAX enhanced mode, and then we have the filmmaker mode settings that I was working on. Now, the problem that I have with this is that it's not consistently bright across the board, and you'll have all these weird issues where, again, shadows especially are just crushed. You have virtually no detail in the shadows. If you look at a scene like this where you have a lot of highlights, you're going to notice on something like the S95F, you're going to have every little bit of highlight, and the clarity is just going to be tremendous. You have all the detail, and again, it feels like a good scene. Now, again, it's not like you don't have any contrast or anything on the Hisense. You have a lot of contrast, which really does feel very good, and you can see that in the pillow and everything like that, but your problem is your highlights come in really, really weak. And again, I don't know what the camera's going to show, but it also is significantly more hazy, again, in the background, and everything is just more hazy by comparison. Now, this is another example to show the dim nature of the Hisense U75G when we talk about HDR. If you notice, the rocks on the Samsung are very, very bright, along with all the highlights on his face. Now, again, the camera might be over brightening a little bit, so we might have to tone it down by maybe just a hair so you can see. But again, the Hisense is rendering that contrast beautifully. It's gorgeous. I want for nothing, but I want for more when I look at the Hisense because the Samsung is just doing it better. And again, it doesn't really matter what scene you pick. The Hisense is generally, it just has a darker HDR representation, and this is in literally every single mode. Near black scenes like this one, about 38 minutes into the Power Ranger movie, is where you're going to see one of the biggest problems with the Hisense U75QG. I'll try to raise my brightness up a little bit so you can see what I'm talking about. Essentially, it's like this. There is just a ton of haze. And I mean a ton of haze on the black bars and everything. Maybe you can't see it. Might need to open it up a bit more so you can see it. It's very, very hazy by comparison. I mean, it's ridiculous. This is basically, for me personally, an unwatchable image right here because it just hazes everything out. So I would say, again, when you look at HDR, the Hisense is just not a strong performer, at least from this particular example that I'm seeing. Again, because again, what I was saying in the initial even comparison just for SDR is when you come out of black, you have a lot of haze, and as you see, we're coming out of a black background or something with a low lit scene. And again, OLED does not have any problems with that. You can see every bit of color, contrast, everything brilliant. But then over here, no, it's very hazy, and I cannot stress that enough. It almost looks like it has no contrast at all. Like the black levels totally fall apart, and it's just not producing a coherent picture. This is where you're going to see probably, again, one of the bigger differences. Again, even though the Hisense has a really high brightness, again, in HDR, you're really honestly just not getting it to the effect, again, for all the highlights and where they're placed like you would with Samsung with the S95F. The highlights on the Samsung are just way bright. I mean, like ridiculously so. And you'll notice, like if I play a little bit of the scene, these campfire scenes are where you're going to have the bigger problems on the Hisense because again, it just darkens everything. and it just creates a ton of haze. And I mean a ton of it. So again, we'll raise that brightness up a bit more so you can see that haze, and this is kind of what you're met with. Campfire scenes that literally are not coherent. This is the difference between a quantum dot OLED and a QD mini LED in terms of HDR. Again, SDR is why I recommend and where I recommend you watch everything, because it doesn't have these kinds of issues where, again, 1 minute it looks bad and the next it looks good and so on and so forth. It's consistent more or less across the board. HDR, you will find a lot more of these issues because it's trying to give you deeper blacks, but then the local dimming algorithm can't really keep up, so you have some issues. And you're seeing it right here. I mean, I would all day, every day go with an S95F for HDR over something like the Samsung, or rather the Hisense U75G, because again, HDR is just not a strong suit. It's just not. And again, play more of the Campfire scene so you can see it, and you see just this haze, general haze. Like, we'll pause right here on people's faces. There's glowing around their faces. Campfire scenes will literally tell on anything. And I'll go ahead and raise the ISO, or camera sensitivity, light a bit more so you can see what I'm talking about. Again, it ain't great. By anyone's stretch of the imagination, this isn't fantastic at all. Where, again, you look at these faces and everything has this general haze to it where it has like this soft look. And that's what I'm running into. That is not unique, by the way, to my settings. That is something you will see in all settings. So again, I'll just show you, this is the filmmaker, or rather the HDR theater mode. This is the HDR game mode. You can barely see any detail at all there. This now is going to be the HDR energy saving mode. This is going to be the HDR sports mode. This is going to be the HDR standard mode, HDR vivid mode, the IMAX enhanced mode. Again, you cannot see a thing there either. And then this is the setting that I created. And again, it's still very difficult to see literally anything. That's the general theme with this television, is that it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't have that headroom for contrast, and you can see it in these Campfire scenes badly. I mean, badly. As they sit down, everything is just hazy. So again, if you're expecting it to compete with top tier televisions all the time, not gonna happen. Just wanted to highlight that. Now, in some instances, like now, you can see absolutely brilliant contrast on the Hisense, albeit, again, it doesn't have the same level of clarity, and you can kind of see that. Again, the background is a bit more muddied by example. It just doesn't have that same level of clarity. Again, as you watch movies and more varying scenes in movies, you're going to notice these weird moments where the Hisense just gets darker than you'd like it to. Like now, you can see clearly the face is just way too dark, where here it's illuminated nearly perfectly. Very vexing issue. And again, it's like that in all modes, just to cycle through it to show you the HDR performance is just not up to the task. And again, I suspect this is going to be the case across the board. It really will. I mean, look at that. What is that? I mean, it's not, I mean, they got to really reinvent the way they're doing their HDR, because that's genuinely not looking good. The only one that gives you a little extra kick is the HDR Vivid mode, but it's still not looking anywhere near as good as it's supposed to. We hit play on this scene and you can clearly see it's just not performing at all the way you would expect it to perform. Again, you look at pretty much every shade of color and it's just subdued. I think that's the one thing I've noticed. IMAX enhanced mode right here. This is literally a muddy mess. And then this is the filmmaker mode settings that I've made. And it's still not perfect, because while colors are deep and everything, I mean, you just don't have the highlight detail. And that's the thing. You're just not going to have the kind of highlights that you would expect. Again, I don't know, if people who aren't particularly picky are going to have a big issue with this. But for me, I definitely do, because I see stronger highlights on this TV. Now, obviously, this is the more expensive TV, so you can expect there to be a benefit somewhere, right? But when they are at similar levels of brightness, I don't expect it to be that big. While this is preserving good detail, again, the overall image is just dim for being an HDR image, which is literally baffling considering you're supposed to have all that stuff. So again, that's what I would say about the HDR on the Hisense U75G. Now, I don't want you to hear this and think like there's no moment where HDR can compete. Like, again, in a very bright scene that's, again, got the whole screen covered and something happening, it does keep up similarly and does give you good contrast, as you can clearly see here. This is a fire type scene. And again, just show you what it looks like. I mean, again, it does keep up pretty decently. You'll have a lot of the impact and the contrast feeling of these fiery scenes. Very nice, very good, right? So again, it's not every example. And like right here, the highlight that came in here, it does feel really nice. Now, if you look over at the Samsung to the left, of course, comparatively, you're going to start to feel the type of way like, well, wait a minute, I don't have everything that's going on the Hisense. That's just kind of, or everything on the Hisense that you have on the Samsung. You might feel that, but again, it's not really that big of a deal. Now, another thing to note is the Samsung can get considerably brighter. And I mean considerably brighter than the Hisense. Right now, we're not at the full level of brightness that it can be at. I'll go ahead and show you what that looks like. So if you're good with throwing away a bit of contrast, and by a bit, I mean quite a bit, you can actually put it into active on top of having contrast enhancer on high. And then you can just get like this wildly bright picture for literally no reason. And again, just to show you what it looks like, we'll go ahead and show you, hit play on the scene here. And again, it is just wildly bright. It's just insane, but you don't have any real contrast. And that's the thing. As you can clearly see, Hisense now is edging it out way more in terms of, again, the fiery scene. You can see more of the smoke. So again, while the Samsung S95F can get brighter, the Hisense does tend to have more contrast, if you will, if you go for the brightest option. Now, similarly, it's also important to note that, again, the Samsung S95F can also mirror the look of the Hisense if you lower the brightness. So instead of using contrast enhancer on high, if you wanted to go to low, you'd have a look like that, which is nearly identical to what we have here, albeit you do have a bit more contrast or dark right here in this scene than what you get on the Samsung, where they are giving you a bit more in the way of that shadow detail. So again, you have options on the Samsung to get whatever kind of HDR you want. And again, this is if we try to get them to mirror each other, this is what it would look like in a scene like that, just so you can get an idea. Again, we'll just go to another chapter, show you just straight off the bat. You see what I mean? Like, pause right here on a face, you can kind of get the idea. You have highlights here that fall really nicely on the Hisense, but again, it's those black levels that really start to muddy a picture, where again, Samsung's not really trying to do it like that, and you have a more subdued highlight, a more natural roll-off, if you will, or point where the highlights ease out and smooth instead of being as intense. So that's one of the things to consider here. And again, in this particular setup, you'd find where, again, Samsung is maybe falling behind, but again, let's adjust the brightness. And then you'd easily see that Samsung is significantly brighter, as again, you know what I mean? If you wanted to mirror the Hisense's dimness, that's what it would look like, but bam, you can get it to look like that. Now, a little fun fact, let's say you want to go on the Samsung, right? You have low on contrast enhancer. You can still get brightness by going to active, and there you go. You see what I mean? And now you still have a crazy bright look. So you have a ton of options as to how to get more brightness out of the Samsung, where this is literally the maximum brightness on the Hisense. Now again, this is just with one HDR film. We know all HDR films aren't the same, so we're gonna try to show something different and see if maybe the results change. So looking at skin tones in a different movie like Transformers, The Rise of the Beast, you can see again, you have good contrast on both TVs in a brighter scene like this. Hisense is rendering a more three-dimensional image with weaker black levels. Samsung has good color. And I think that's where you're starting to see the difference. Again, Hisense can be a little bit brighter in some areas like right over here. However, it's not consistent. And what I mean by that is if I show you, again, the HDR tone mapping is very interesting with how it works. So again, contrast enhancer on low with the static tone mapping. If you go to high, it now gets really bright. But you lose a bit of the background detail, as you can clearly see, and some of the detail in the face. So some of the richness goes away for the brightness. And it becomes a balancing act, honestly, that becomes very difficult. Because then let's say you have static here, and you go to active, and then now it's really bright. Now you can always turn off contrast enhancer as well when you have active tone mapping, and then that will increase the level of contrast that you have from that to that. So again, that's a bit better. And again, there are so many different creative ways with the Samsung, I think, to pull out a balance of contrast and color. And that is what makes this a very, very, very difficult TV to kind of pin down and say, okay, this is its peak performance, because it really can switch depending on what feature you enable. Where the Hisense, this is its max brightness, max capability. Not ideal. You would want a bit more versatility when you deal with HDR kind of content. And again, the fact that the black levels are as muddied as they are on the Hisense does make it a bit difficult to get behind. Again, you look at the airplane scene like this, you can kind of see what I'm talking about. We pause right here as they're just sitting down. It's really just crushing the black levels horribly on the Hisense U75QG. And again, I don't know why it's crushing the black levels, but it definitely is. If we raise up our camera ISO so you could see just a little bit just how much more the black levels are crushed, it's crushed. Like it's all the way crushed. And again, doesn't matter what picture mode you put it in, there are just these weird moments in HDR where black levels become crushed. And I don't know why that is. Again, doesn't matter how you look at it, what you do, it doesn't look as good as, again, a premium TV like a Samsung S95F. I would imagine this would also carry through on the Sony Bravia 8 Mark II. So again, while it might beat these TVs for SDR, the most universal way of watching TV, if you want to use HDR, let's say you're using the internal apps or something like that, this is where you're going to be disappointed. Because again, it does not have that premium flagship level performance. And again, you're just seeing it right here. Now, comparatively looking at a scene like this, you can kind of get an idea as to how the black levels and the brightness aren't up to par with, again, something more premium like a flagship QD OLED, as we can clearly see in this example. And it really honestly doesn't matter what you look at. When you start getting to stress testing moments in movies, you're going to have problems in terms of highlights and its ability to retain purity of highlights. Doesn't mean the picture is bad, right? It's not bad in brighter scenes for sure, but it's just not doing what a flagship TV would offer. Now, again, I don't think anybody would hear that statement and be like, it's not giving me a flagship television's experience. Well, obviously not. But you can clearly see, like in an example like this, there's just higher color volume, the brightness, the luminosity, the vibrancy that you can get out of the image, where this is going to be a little bit more dull. By example, your blacks are crushing around the gun here versus here where you have all that shadow detail. Little nuance things like that will start to get really, really, really annoying. Also, again, one of the things that you'll pay attention to are the details within the faces. Again, it's just darker. And I think that's the representation of Hisense this year. Now, again, Samsung, you can raise the brightness. I have it lowered, but you can raise it pretty much as you want. Experiment around with what you're comfortable with. But that's the thing with the Samsung. It's so versatile. It has so much to offer that it's so difficult to say that Hisense could even, I would say, compete comparatively as we're watching, again, the motion and everything kind of kick off. They trade back and forth in that regard, but in almost every other way, they are just like too identical, or not identical, but too different in terms of like the black level performance. And again, this is the kind of stuff that I look at when I make my determination saying, hey, one is better versus the other. Because again, as I clearly look at this scene, the rocket flying past, the character, everything, I'm seeing a big difference in terms of like immersion for HDR. And that is where we come up with our winner. So again, the winner of this comparison is going to be the Samsung S95F for HDR. Hisense, unfortunately, especially when you have muddy scenes like this, they just can't get it done as things really do get muddied as action starts to move across the screen. They have good clarity and detail for where they are, but comparatively to something that's like a top tier brand, it's not going to produce the same level of HDR. And again, this is where Hisense needs to refine themselves and work just a little bit harder. But let me know what you think about this comparison in the comments down below. And until the next video, I'll see you guys later.